Hi everyone. Before we get started on this week's lesson, I will mention to you that the video for the image critiques will be coming along shortly, as soon as I get all of the submissions in. And please, by all means, again, make sure you get your assignments in because they are worth twice as much now since we're not meeting face to face as far as the final grade is concerned. So it's very important that you turn these in. If you miss the deadline and Sakai won't take the files, then just email them directly to me. Even if they're late, um, you're going to be far better off to get them in than not do them at all. Um, we only have a few classes left, so I want to make sure that nobody really gets left behind here. So this week's topic is going to be color. Last week we talked about black and white and histograms and the relationship between the two. This week we're going to talk about actually using color as a subject. And so before we do that, we're going to take a look at a couple of color wheels. The first one that you see on the right here is an overlap of the three primary colors. In light, the three primary colors are red, green, and blue. That is not true in pigment. If you're mixing paint or something like that, green is not a primary color, yellow is. But in light, it's red, green, and blue. And what that means is um, if you, actually, let's just open this file because we can do it on any file. If we look at the histogram for this file, we see that it's composed of a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. Every digital file is composed of three color channels, red, green, and blue. And the combination of those three are what gives us natural color. So to carry that a little bit further, if I were going to, try to get this off of that, if I were going to um, shoot an object with multiple colored lights, and I used a red light, a green light, and a blue light with the same levels of intensity in all three, wherever they overlapped would be white light. And you see that in the center here, where red, green, and blue overlap, you get white light. Where you only have two of those are these complementary colors in here, yellow, magenta, and cyan. So cyan is a combination of green and blue, yellow is a combination of green and red, and magenta is the combination of red and blue. But where all three overlap, you get white. So what's really cool about that is if you have three light sources and one is red and one is green and one is blue, but they are not lined up exactly, for example, if they're offset a little bit, what would happen is where all three hit your subject, you would get white light, but the shadows that it would create behind that subject would be yellow, magenta, and cyan. So it's kind of an interesting breakdown of those colors. I'm going to go back to bridge here. So that's our first color wheel, just to show you the dynamics of the three primary colors and how they mix together. The second color wheel is really the one we'll kind of focus on mostly this week because it shows us the complementary and contrasting colors. So when we talk about complementary colors, you're generally looking at any three of these that are next to each other. So, red down to magenta, the yellows and the greens, the cyans and the blues. Those shades, any three of them are what we would call not contrasting color, but uh, more of a complementary color or monochromatic color. Where you go across the color wheel, that's when you get contrasting color. Blue matches against yellow, red against cyan, magenta against green, and then you've got your shades in between. So if you want to contrast your colors, and you don't necessarily have to go directly across, red and green sometimes can be very contrasting colors, as can red and blue. Yellow and magenta, for example, might suffice as much as green and magenta would. But it's when you go opposite of those colors is when you get contrasting color. And we're going to look at some examples of that right here. So this is what we would call color harmony, where essentially the entire image is a single color or variations of a single color. We've got this red maroonish tint, excuse me, in the image, and the only contrast to that is the skin tone, which still is in that red family. So this whole image has a great deal of color harmony in it, rather. This is another one. You could make a case for this being color contrast because the skin tone is a warm tone and the background is a cool tone. But overall, the vast majority of this image is harmonious. It's all basically the same color, or shades of the same color, or two colors which complement each other really well. Sometimes you'll see color used, very bright color, very monochromatic color again, other than the words volume 1, pretty much, and a little bit on the patches that she's wearing. Pretty much everything in this image is yellow and black. And that yellow being very overpowering is it's a way to command attention, and movie posters use a technique like this a lot, actually. So this is an example of, again, very harmonious color, very simple, single color for the most part. The way this is shot and filtered, this is a digital projection again onto the model. So when we're dealing with color, we don't necessarily have to have multiple colors in the image in order to have color as the subject. And in this case, I think color definitely plays a huge part, as does compositionally a couple of other things. You'll notice that the lines created by that digital projection are not vertical. They're on a little bit of an angle, just like we've talked about before, that diagonals, triangles, things like that are typically stronger than verticals and horizontals, and so that's the reason that this is shot the way it is. And even the model's body isn't straight across the image, it's a little bit on an angle as well. So, as we go through this, we're talking about color this week, but I just want to make sure that we don't skip and forget some of the things we learned about composition, about exposure basics, and so forth. So I'll mention that when it's appropriate. So here's an example of what I would call color contrast. The red of her hair contrasting a great deal with the green in the background. Resin greens work really well together. You'll see it in flower photography a lot. And in this case, a couple of other things were done as well. So the image overall is a very low-key, darker image. In fact, if we go back and look at the histogram for this one, go into the RGB, you can see that it's shifted a lot to the left-hand side. This represents, again, the darker pixels in the image, which would be her outfit, the clothing, the bottom, the corners of the image, which go very black. And as you come forward, there are pixels that are lighter. That would be her skin tone and the highlights in her hair and so forth. But by comparison, there are far more dark ones than there are light ones. But anyway, getting back to color, this is it's a good example of color contrast. Also compositionally, we've got a couple of things going on here. We've got leading lines. This background is swooped the way it is intentionally to lead into the subject, both behind her and off to the side like this. And pose in the direction of her gaze, the direction of her face, is in the direction of the main light. So we're not casting harsh shadows across one side of her face. She's turned into the light, so this is considered lighting the mask of the face. Even though that doesn't specifically represent for color, again, I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the things that we've learned already in the past. As we move down, now we have, again, color contrast, so it's red and green, just like we had in the previous image, but instead of a portrait, we have a little more of a candid image, I guess. This was shot in Bermuda, where they still have telephone booths, believe it or not, and they still work. But the green in the foreground and then the green that surrounds that telephone booth, or that series of telephone booths, is good color contrast. And you'll notice that there are a lot of red flowers in the greenery in the background, so kind of carries it even further. And then the background, the wall, is a very neutral gray. So the color, the only color that we have really is in those flowers, the greenery, and the telephone booths. So this is an interesting one. We have a couple of colors going on here with the blue jeans and the darker blue pants that the girl is wearing. But notice what's been done here. So the background is basically red and white. Their tops are basically red and white. And her red top is positioned intentionally against the white background, and his white shirt is positioned against the red background. So we have a balance going on between the whites and between the reds. Um, this he wouldn't have stood out nearly as much if he had been in front of this and if she had been in front of that. Now, if I were photographing her by herself, I might do a shot of her here, but I might also put her in front of that red so that, again, her skin tone would contrast with that and would stand out. In fact, you can see his skin tone does stand out against that. But her shirt would blend in a little more with the red in the background and make that even more pronounced. So sometimes we have areas of just very, very strong color, and strong color can make an interesting subject as well. This is an outdoor performance at a tapas bar, and so with the colored lights that are being used under the stage, which contrast with the blue sky in the background, it creates an interesting effect. Same location, different angle, and different lighting on the stage subjects. But overall, you've got this sort of bluish, purplish, almost magenta lighting on the stage. And even though there's a little bit of warm light around on the sides, that really overpowers the image. Peacock, which is basically a couple of colors, the blues and the greens. Not a great color palette normally, like you wouldn't maybe paint your room these colors, but in nature we do have this from time to time, and peacock is a great example of that. So whoever shot this is not one of my images, uh, cropped it in very tight. There is a little bit of background showing, but not that much. So they really reduced it to almost a two-dimensional look and very, very colorful. This is a great example of warm versus cool. As it gets later and later in the evenings, you get this sort of blue cast, especially when there's snow present. And then the incandescent lights, street lights, and this is, I'm guessing this is probably maybe even a ski resort or something. Um, it almost looks like lava running through there. And I love the lighting that it gives onto the face of the cliff behind that. So warm versus cool is a very, very cool effect. It's something that can be used to great advantage. More often than not, that's a great combination, so keep that in mind. Here we again have warm versus cool, those complementary colors going across, or contrasting colors rather, going across that color wheel, blue and yellow. It's an interesting shot in the first place, obviously, but the addition of color, and they clearly knew what colors to use here to contrast, makes it an even more interesting effect. Same idea, same colors, as a matter of fact. If you look, the blue and the yellow matched in the left image just like it was in the right image. So the yellow sets off against the darker blue background. Um, the white hats is a neutral, but it's about as bright as the yellow dress, so it kind of falls right in with that. So blues and yellows, reds and greens, those colors work really well together when you're doing contrast. This is, again, it's been reduced to just three colors, the green, the yellow, and the salmon color. And it's an odd combination of colors. If you would look and find these on the color wheel, you'd find out that they're all in very, the green and yellow are close to each other, but then that salmon being on the other side of that wheel is pretty interesting and pretty uh, provides a lot of contrast, which is what you look for a lot of times in an image. little more subtle here, but the yellows in the dress sort of match the warmer tones in the door behind, and then this overall, I'm not even sure what to call this color. Um, it's not the salmon that we had before, and it's not pink, so I'm not really sure what that is, but it's a very subtle effect. Also, compositionally, we've got leading lines, these steps, the railing on the steps that are going up. Um, they lead us back to that door, and they also give us a little bit of convergence. Not that they actually meet if they went on forever. Obviously, they would at some point in the background there, but um, the fact that they are getting closer to each other in the background more so than they are in the foreground, you could make a case for them being converging lines. Very colorful overall image. A lot of different color from all over the color wheel here. Flowers are a great source of um, color information. But again, notice that this has been cropped very, very tightly to eliminate any distractions, anything other than just the flower petals and the color that they represent. This is another cool one for a couple of reasons. So it's a very dark, low-key image overall. In fact, the histogram, if you look at this, um, is way, way shifted to the left side, the dark side, because of all the negative space being as dark as it is. Uh, Even though when you look at it, you think of these bright colors, these bright pencils, overall the image is a very dark image. But compositionally, having that yellow pencil pulled forward a little bit and using that as a point of focus so that the foreground pencils and the background pencils fall out of focus is a great technique. This would not be nearly as effective a shot if all of those pencils were in focus. So again, a lot of different techniques used in some of these images. I want you to kind of keep all of them in mind. Our assignment for next week is going to be to create some images um, that use color as a subject. And I'm going to suggest that you do 3 images. One is going to be something with color harmony, like this, where you basically have some monochromatic overall color. That could be one, that could be one. Just to give you a couple of examples, uh, even though there are more colors present, when you look at that, your brain tells you it's essentially kind of one color. We also want to do something where color itself, a single color, sort of overpowers the image in some way, whether it's used with lighting or the subject or whatever it is. We just want to fill the frame with something that is a single color. And then thirdly, we want to do the color contrast, which is something like this or like this. Again, looking at the color wheel, it could be, in that case, was blue and yellow. It could be red and cyan. It could be magenta and green, or any of the spokes in between. But something that is relatively opposite. Again, red and green can sometimes work. It's not quite cyan, but it's pretty close. Red and blue can work as well. So the 3 images, one would be a little more monochromatic, although it will have multiple colors in it. One would be like this, using a single color, very strong single color, and then one would be color contrast between 2 images. So I will be posting another video soon as far as the image critiques are concerned. Hopefully you guys all get those in, and we'll have something to talk about there. It really sucks that we don't have the interaction back and forth. The good news is that it makes these lessons a little quicker because we kind of go right to the point, and knowing that you can, watch this again and again, which I'm sure you want to do like over and over again. But if you miss something, you can always go back and watch it. Please make sure you at least, if you watch it only once, make sure you really pay attention. In a couple of the submissions that we've gotten already for last week's assignment or this week's assignment, a couple of you, well, one that I can think of for sure, definitely kind of missed the boat a little bit as far as the intent that we were going for. Also want to remind you, if Westlib is not participating in the Adobe program, which would allow you to use the suite, the Adobe suite through May 31st. You can always download, just go to the Adobe website and download their trial version. In fact, let me pull that up for you here and show you where that is. If you go to their main page and then go to, let's see, they move this all the time. So we'll come down to products, go to Creative Cloud. It's in the lower left-hand corner. And yeah, here we go. So Photoshop and InDesign Photoshop and Lightroom are bundled together in this app. And if you click the try for free, you can download it, and it's a fully functioning version that'll work for 30 days, which should get us through pretty much the rest of the semester. So that's where you would go to take care of that. And I do prefer that you, and I'm sure you would too, use Photoshop and Bridge and Camera Raw and all the things that we've been working with so far during the semester, rather than try to learn something new. If you have already downloaded the trial and run your 30 days out, I'm not sure quite what to tell you, contact me and we'll see if we can come up with a solution. But if you haven't downloaded it and or you haven't exhausted your 30-day window, then by all means, this is what you want to do. All right, so I will post another video shortly, like I said, on the critiques. I'll probably work on that tomorrow night sometime and have that up in the next day or so. So if you have any questions at all, any issues, any comments, whatever, I still want to try and keep as much interaction between us as possible. And again, remember when you submit your images for the assignment, to submit text with them as well, so you can kind of give me an idea of what your thought process was on the subject matter that you picked and how you photographed it. All right, guys, that's it for now. We'll be in touch again soon.